Why God Makes You Wait. Words 1,187. Runtime 9 11 min at 135 WPM. There is a kind of waiting that doesn't feel like waiting. It feels like being left. It feels like standing in a room where everyone else seems to have received their lives, their answers, their outcomes, their clarity, and you are still holding the same question you walked in with, the same hope, the same unanswered prayer, the same particular ache that you've learned to carry quietly so other people don't have to see it. Most of us are somewhere in a waiting season right now. Some of us have been in this one for longer than we expected. Longer than seems reasonable, longer than feels fair. And the question underneath all of it is the same. What is this for? His name was Abram. He was 75 years old when the call came. Leave your country, leave your family, go to a land I will show you. And then the promise, I will make you into a great nation. I will make your name great. Through you, all the families of the earth will be blessed. He went. That part of the story is often told as though it was simple. It was not simple. He was 75. He had built a life in a city called Haran, a functioning, rooted life. And now he was dismantling it, loading everything onto animals, leaving the only world he knew for a destination he couldn't locate on any map, because the only instruction he'd been given was go, and I will show you. He went. That movement, the obedience at the beginning, is what most people remember about Abraham, but it is not the most important part of his story. What followed was 25 years. 2.5 decades between the promise and the fulfillment, between the word, I will make you into a great nation, and the birth of a single child. He arrived in Canaan. The land was already occupied. He built altars. He moved from place to place, Shechem to Bethel to the Negev to Egypt and back again. He survived a famine. He survived a war between kings. He watched his nephew Lot choose the better land and let him have it. And year after year, no child. The promise had been given. He believed the promise, or tried to, but the years kept passing and nothing arrived, and there came a moment when he said to God, plainly, You have given me no offspring. A servant born in my house will be my heir. It is one of the most human sentences in all of Scripture. Not a crisis of faith, a statement of practical reality. I have done the math. This is how things stand. God answered him, counted the stars, promised again, so shall your descendants be, and it says he believed, and it was credited to him as righteousness. But then more years passed. When Abram was 86, his wife Sarai made a suggestion. She had a servant, an Egyptian woman named Hagar. Take her as a secondary wife. Perhaps the child would come that way. He agreed. Hagar conceived. Ishmael was born. It is worth sitting with what that moment must have been like. 13 more years passed after Ishmael's birth before Isaac came. 13 years of a child in the camp who was not the promised child. 13 years of a complication that had felt like a solution. No one in that story made a simple choice. Everyone was doing what seemed reasonable given the information they had, and everyone paid the cost of it. When Abram was 99, God appeared again. And this time, something was different. This time, God changed his name. Abram, father of many, became Abraham, father of a multitude. And Sarah received a new name too. A name change in that world was not a symbolic gesture. It was a declaration of identity. God was saying, I am not calling you what you were. I am calling you what you are becoming. The old name no longer fits. Isaac was born when Abraham was 100 years old, 25 years after the promise. a quarter century of wandering and waiting and wrong turns and renewed covenants and name changes, and the particular slow erosion of a man who holds on to something for so long that holding on stops being an act of will and becomes simply who he is. The child was born. Sarah laughed. Abraham circumcised the boy on the 8th day, as he had been instructed. And then, some years later, came the morning that tested everything. Take your son, your only son, the one you love, go to the land of Moriah, and offer him there as a burnt offering on one of the mountains I will show you. He rose early. He saddled the donkey. He split the wood. He took 2 servants and his son. He walked 3 days. There is almost no description of what those 3 days were like. There is only the walking, the donkey, the wood, the boy. On the 3rd day, Abraham saw the place from a distance. He told the servants to stay. He said, "We will go and worship, and we will come back to you. We will come back. Not I will come back." He laid the wood on his son. He took the fire and the knife. They walked up together. Isaac said, "Father, here is the fire and the wood, but where is the lamb for the burnt offering?" Abraham said, "God himself will provide the lamb, my son." At the top of the mountain he bound his son. He laid him on the altar. He raised the knife. The voice came before the blade fell. "Abraham, Abraham, do not lay a hand on the boy. Now I know that you fear God, because you have not withheld your son, your only son, from me." He looked up. A ram caught in the thicket. He offered it instead. What happened on that mountain is often read as a test of obedience. But there is something deeper here. The man who walked up that mountain was not the man who had stood in Haran at 75. 25 years of waiting had dismantled something in him and rebuilt it differently. He had been stripped of the certainty that he could make the promise happen through his own arrangements. Hagar had shown him that. He had been stripped of the ability to control the timing. He had learned, through the slow passage of years and the repeated renewals of a covenant he could not see fulfilled, that the God who had called him did not operate on his schedule. And so by the time he stood on Mount Moriah, the knife raised over the one thing the waiting had finally produced, he held it differently than he would have held it at 75. Not because he understood, but because the waiting had made him into someone for whom trust no longer required understanding. We will come back. He didn't know that. He couldn't have known that, but something in him had been formed. Through years of desert mornings and unanswered questions and wrong turns and name changes and the slow, unrelenting work of a wait that refused to move faster than it needed to, into someone who could say it and mean it. The waiting was not the obstacle. The waiting was the work. There is no version of the man who walked up Moriah that doesn't include the 25 years. You cannot produce that kind of trust through information. You cannot study your way to it. You cannot will yourself into the version of Abraham who held the knife. You become that through the waiting. Not because the waiting is pleasant, not because the years don't cost something real, but because nothing else does what waiting does. The things that matter most, the depth of trust, the loosening of control, the willingness to hold something precious with open hands, these are formed slowly in the ordinary darkness of a season you cannot shorten. Some of you have been waiting for a long time. Not days, not months, years. You have done the honest, ordinary work of holding on to something that hasn't come yet. You felt the weight of it. You've had moments of Hagar where you tried to help it along, and it made things more complicated. You've had the moment of Abram looking at the stars and choosing to believe again, even though the math still didn't work. Here is what 25 years and one man seem to say. The wait is not against you. It is not punishment, and it is not evidence of your irrelevance, and it is not the universe being indifferent to your particular story. The waiting is doing something that only the waiting can do. It is making you into the version of yourself that can hold what's coming. Not because the wait is wasted, because the wait is the work.